Hey, what's up, John Sonmez here. So I got another one of these reach me requests. If you're interested, you can check it out here. This is from a coaching client. You can go into the description and see where you can get to the reach me page if you want to ask me. And some of these videos are some of the questions I do a video on. And if I do a video, obviously you'll get a longer answer than the very short amount that usually they're like 1 or 2 minutes, or you can pay for 15 minutes. Let's see here. Okay, so I also offer coaching, by the way, and you get priority if you do coaching. I don't really advertise it because I usually have most of the slots filled, but if it's available, there'll be a link below that you can check out or in the cards. So I got this question. It's a real estate question. And it's, hi, John, I would like to see how you would analyze whether you would buy a given property or not. This is just a property I chose in a location that I'm somewhat familiar with, just for the sake of an example. So we've got a property here, which I'll take a look at. You're most likely not familiar with the real estate market in this location. I would like to see how you would think through a market/location you're unfamiliar with, since most of us will be in this scenario when buying our first properties. Okay, so this is good. I think this is a good test. We'll see. But no, this is something that you have to do. So let's go through this one by one. Okay, what is the actual criteria/definition in your eyes that determines whether a given property is a good deal? I know that you look at things based off property's total cash flow, but a $10 million property and $10K property could give plus $500 a month in cash flow. So there has to be more in determining whether something is a good deal based off of cash flow above. Okay. So let's look at that. Let's start with that. So let's see, open up this link here. Okay. And you guys should be able to see this. Okay. Nice shake roof, shakes shingles on there. Okay. Let's see. So we've got Sacramento, California. We've got $92,000, 525. Let's see, rent estimate. Zestimate is $1,100 a month. Now, to be honest with you, normally what I want to do here is I don't want to look at Zillow because I don't necessarily trust Zillow. I mean, even though there's some decent information, what I want is a MLS listing, a real MLS listing, and I want to see the previous history of the property, what it sold for before. I'd also like to see from the realtor, I'd like to see rent rolls. Usually some of the MLS listings will have the rent, the actual rents, if this is a rental property in there. So this will use this information, but I would usually want more than just here. So we can base it off of this though and see here. So, and I think later on in the question I'll answer. I think there's a couple of questions about like determining the rents and whatnot. Okay, but let's just look at this here. So first thing I'm going to do is look. I'm going to kind of look at the area. Like, and here's the thing, right? You should be familiar with the area, right? So if I'm buying a rental property, I'm going to be getting listings from this area. I'm going to have a real estate agent send me listings that are coming up in a general area so that I know, or in the city, I know what's a good area, what's a bad area. I know what the price ranges are, right, in that area. If I'm local, I might drive through the area, right? I might look up some crime reports and whatnot just to see if something seems like too good of a deal, right? And that's, something like this where it's like 2 bed, 1 bath, 933 square feet. The price is kind of low. Again, I don't know much about Sacramento. It looks like it might not be the best area, especially when I look at this building, although it's fairly well landscaped. That's not enough information to know off of that, but there's some hints and stuff, right? Okay, so this is a condo. Okay, so immediately I'm thinking about HOAs, and there it has HOA fee of $197 per month. Okay, so that's makes it more expensive. Then I'm not going to go through the full markup here. I'm just going to kind of show you guys what I would generally do, okay, to figure this stuff out. Okay, so what do we got here? Parking attached, garage 1 space. Okay, last sold in 2009 for $32,500. Okay, so that's interesting. So the estimate is 95,525. How much does it change in 30 days? This seems high, right? Okay, so we can look at the tax history too. So it was listed for sale. Interesting, in 14. Listing removed. Okay, so I don't know. Or that's the price history. The tax history. Again, this is important. We need to know what the tax assessments were for the year, so we know what the property taxes are per year, because this is all important in the calculation. Neighborhood, Foothill Farms. Okay, apparently it's very hot, and we can look around here and see what other properties. Right. So one thing is, like, you don't want to be the most expensive property. You want to be kind of the cheapest property in an expensive neighborhood. That's the best place to be. But you can see some ranges here. So, I mean, there's a lot of condos in here, but then there's some good single families that are pretty expensive. Well, or relatively, the 200,000 and 300,000. So that's a pretty good sign there. That's not bad. Okay. So then, let's see what we got here. Some home expenses. And school. This is somewhat good to look at. This will kind of give you an idea. Like, this is not very good school ratings. Pretty bad, right? So this could be that's something to look at. But the biggest thing that we want to look at is the numbers, right? And we want to know if something rents out. And so what I'm going to do here, let me see if I could kind of calculate this out. What's the best way to show this here? Right. So I want to know, like, what is the rent in relation to the purchase price? That's kind of my fastest way to determine if something's a good deal, right? So maybe I can just go calculator in Google. Let's see it. Okay. So, all right. So I want to see, okay, what are we looking at rent wise here? It's $1,100 a month, and then the price is $92,000. So if you take 1,100 divided by 92, and then times 100, so it's a 1.19%. Okay, that's pretty damn good, actually. But here's the thing. The problem is that this has that HOA fee of $197 a month. So I want to kind of knock that off of the rent there. Okay. So what I'm probably going to do here is then say, let's say 92,000. Let's say that the rent, 197 is really $900 a month. But again, I don't know if this is, like, sometimes this is a little bit high. I want to be about 10% under market there. So I'm going to say that, in general, I'm going to count on having a rent of, let's say, $800 a month. Okay. And kind of figure out, does this make sense? So where's the clear on this? Okay. So if we said $800 a month divided by 92,000, right? Now we're at like 0.86. Okay, which is okay, but it's not great, right? I want to get 1% or higher. 1.1, 1.2 is really good property. Again, this is just a kind of a ballpark thing here. If this were in a condo, it'd be a little bit different. But and I don't know what this actual rent is. But that's the thing, is like, so that's kind of the ratio. So, like, to answer this question, it's not about the cash flow here. And here's the thing, right? I mean, that's just a very quick calculation to see if something's within the range. What I want to do here is I want to take this, okay, and I want to say, okay, let's say it's $92,525. Okay, what am I actually going to negotiate here? I'm not going to pay the full price. Maybe I'm thinking I'm picking it up for 85,000, or I can kind of figure out what the number is, and then I can figure out, maybe it even does it in Zillow here, but I can kind of figure out what my monthly payment would be, right? So I want to figure out all of the numbers. Okay. And like I said, I'm not going to go through all of the numbers in this case, but I'm going to start here with $92,525, right? I'm going to figure out what is the current rate that I'm going to be paying, right? Or what's my mortgage. Okay. I need to add taxes in there, so I know what the tax is. I need the HOA, right? And then I'm going to rent it out for so much money. Okay, and then I'm going to pay for a property management fee, and I have some maintenance and other expenses, right? I'm going to figure out all the fees, right? Insurance, everything that I possibly am going to have to pay, and then I'm going to run the numbers and see what's left over for me, right? So again, if we kind of looked at this from the perspective of, and again, I'm not going to run through the entire calculation here, but if you take this $1,100 a month rent, if you believe that, right, I'm going to discount that and say it's $1,000 a month rent, right? And we can just do some quick math here. If I got $1,000 a month, okay, and then I'm paying 10% of that thousand, okay, to property management company, okay, that leaves me with $900. Okay, and then I'm paying HOA fee of $200. Okay, that leaves me with $700. Okay, and then I'm paying taxes, and let me see if we got the rate here. So we're at $700. I want to see what happens here if it's got the actual taxes. I think this has got the full payment in there. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to go through on a mortgage calculator and figure it out. But you got, this is not the best thing with all the fees in there. Those are pretty high fees. I shop around and kind of figure out, based on, and these rates are not actually very good right now too. So that's why it can depend. But, we're going to look at probably like a monthly payment of another $370, maybe $400, like to be on the safe side. Let's say $400. Okay. So let's say we've got $400 here. Okay. So then that leaves us with $300 left in cash flow at this point. And then I'm also going to have to kind of calculate here that I'm going to need some reserves for some maintenance, right? Maybe another like 10% of the rent, right? So maybe another $100 a month. So that leaves me with about $200 left, right? And then, I think that's probably it. I think taxes, insurance were included in that mortgage payment. So we're cash flowing maybe $200 a month. So that's not exactly great. That's not a huge amount of wiggle room there. I mean, it depends on the price, but it's an okay deal. Okay, and I guess it depends on how much you put down too, right? So that's the other thing is like I probably want to put down 20% or 20, 25%, right? Minimum 20% in this case. We could look at what happens when you switch this to 25%. And I'd actually run through a real mortgage calculator to figure this stuff out. But and they've got one here too that you could do. So anyway, so that's kind of what I'm looking at, right? I'm trying to get an idea. I want to know exactly what it is. In fact, I think this is the second part of this question. Could you show? So first part of this question, right? So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at whether or not that property, based on the purchase price, whether the rent to purchase price ratio is good, is favorable, right? Because I want a cash flow based on how much money I put in, right? So you could look at it as, a cap rate. You could look at it as, return on investment or cash on cash return. You can use all those calculations, but in general, right, I want to get more cash flow. All right, I want to get a better deal and more cash flow for a lower price. That's what's going to be the most important thing, right? Yes, you could buy a $10 million property and get a $500 a month cash flow. That's not as good as buying a $50,000 property and getting a $500 a month cash flow, right? But the most important thing is that the property cash flows in general, okay? And, there's a lot of variables in there. So could you show step-by-step how you would go about accurately calculating the total cash flow for this property? And so that's what I kind of did here, which should be how much money we're getting back each month, profit after mortgage, tax, HOA, expenses. And like I said, I did a little bit of a back of a napkin math here. I didn't, go and put in all the numbers there, but that's it. That's what you do is you use all of those numbers. And to be honest, you can find plenty of tools online that show you how to do this, right? That should give you all of the things to fill in from maintenance to, you just want to make sure that you don't miss stuff, right? Figure out everything that's going to cost you to operate that property. Okay, that's really important. So from HOA fees, especially if it's a condo, make sure you figure that stuff out. Okay, all of the expenses. How would you go about getting a good estimate of the rent that this rental property could bring? Since I imagine this estimate is inaccurate. So one of the best things to do is just to go to Craigslist, right? And then to look in that area. Maybe you can look by zip code. And well, the best thing is honestly, it's like pretend like you're trying to rent in that area, right? So call around. It's not, I don't know how to search by zip code. I'm not a big Craigslist user, but you're gonna call around. I'll just answer it here. So you're just gonna call around and you're going to call up on different properties in the area. You're going to look at rental listings, right? You could look on Craigslist. You could look like whatever it is, apartments.com or rent.com. I haven't done this in a while. So, pretend like you're trying to rent. If you're actually trying to rent in that area, and that's the best thing to do. Call some property management companies and tell them what you're looking for and ask them for the best deal that you can get on an apartment or rental, equivalent in that area. And you just gather that data, right? You can also look at the rent rolls for the property. So if I'm seriously considering a property, I want to go and I want to say, hey, give me, the current owner, give me your accounting, your rent rolls for the last 4 years if you have them. I want to see what is actually rented out. I want to see some proof of this. This is my due diligence, okay? But I'm still not going to trust their rent rolls. I want to see what is the current market bearing, and I want to go and figure that out. And the thing is, like, that's why if you're looking in a particular area, you're going to get an idea of the rents, right? There were certain markets, when I was investing in the Boise market and doing a lot of active investment, I know what things rent for there. I know what is reasonable and what's not. And so when I would see a property and they're claiming these high rents, or you're looking at this estimate, I'd be like, no, that's not right. And what I also do is I try to keep my rent 10% under market, or I plan on it being 10% under market, so that I'm never vacant, right? It's more important. I could go into the details there, but essentially if you're vacant one extra month, it pretty much is worse for you in general, right? 1 or 2 months than losing 10% of the potential rent. So it's better to just be cheaper and make sure that it gets rented out. But that's the thing. It's like you've got to just go out and make some phone calls and get familiar with the market in the area. And that's the same thing with purchase prices and just figuring out what properties are good, is you get familiar with the area. So if you go and you pretend like you're trying to rent and you start calling up places and you start looking on Craigslist and you start looking online to like you're seriously trying to rent a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, right? In this case, in this area, then you'll have a really good idea of what the actual rents are, right? It's the same thing as like trying to purchase something on eBay. Like if you want to figure out how to price something, like a buy it now on eBay, try and buy it, right? Try to find the best price that you can on something, right? And that's the price that generally that you're not going to be able to sell it for more than, right? That's kind of the price that you can get, is whatever you could get it for, right? There's not very many like huge arbitrage situations where, so that's what you've got to do. Okay. There's so many variable expenses to account for in the long term, such as new roof installations, heating systems, vacancies, repairs, maintenance. How do you go about approximating when calculating the cash flow? Again, I usually just use 10% of the rent as that, right? That's, it's not super accurate, but in general, it gives you a little bit of a buffer, right? If it's a really old property, maybe you're increasing that to 15 or 20% if there's a lot of problems and whatnot, but you're always going to have repairs. You're always going to have problems. When you have like a new roof, in fact, I'm just getting a new roof on one of my properties. It's going to be a really big expense, but it's a capital improvement. So it's just one of those things, right? I have ACs go out and stuff like that, and those are pretty expensive. And sometimes you're going to get hit with a bunch of stuff at once. But in general, the important thing here is to get a good home inspection and to make sure there's not a lot of stuff that is going to be costing you pretty quickly. So this is just one of those things, though. You can't really know what the variable expenses are going to be, so you just create a buffer. And, you might be able to go for like 5 years without really having a major expense, and you're collecting that extra, you're accounting for that in your cash flow situation. Then you have to pay for AC repair, and it's like $2,000 for a new AC unit, or $3,000. And that's just how it is. So, okay. I know that's not the best answer, but there's really nothing more that you can do there. It's like, shit happens. Like you're going to have stuff, but hopefully it won't happen that often. And like I said, you have a little bit of a buffer in there. So, right. Again, if you have a 10% buffer and you're getting $1,000 a month, right, then in 1 year, right, you're counting on paying $1,200 in repairs in some kind of maintenance, right? So just figure out how much maintenance you expect to pay in a year, how many repairs and whatnot, and that's what you should be thinking about, right? So, and some years it's going to be less than that. It should be, but then some years you're going to have like a whole roof that you're going to have to replace, and it's going to be several years worth of buffered maintenance in there, right? So that's just how it is. Okay. And the less risk averse you are, by the way, the more that you just make that buffer. Maybe you make a 20% buffer because you just want to make sure. Okay. So now that we know the cash flow, e.g. $500 a month, I would imagine we would have to compare this number to something to know relatively this property is a good buy. For example, if we're getting $500 a month cash flow, the property costs $10 million, I would imagine that would not be as good as the property gave $500 a month in cash flow, but only cost $10K. Yeah. Okay. So, just at a high level overview, we already talked about this. I like to look at purchase price to rent ratio, but again, there's a lot of metrics you could use. Cap rate is a very popular one. You can use cash on cash return, right? But essentially, you want to be getting the best deal for the money that you're putting into it, right? Because you're going to be putting some money down, you're going to be investing some money into a property, and you want to get the highest return on that. Could you break down which metrics we should be focusing on? There are many different real estate metrics, such as cash on cash return, cap rate, etc. They're used when analyzing real estate deals, and I'm completely unfamiliar with which ones to use and which ones are the most important. It doesn't really matter which ones you use. Honestly, I know some people will get very upset when I say this, but what matters is that you consistently use the same metrics, right? And they're all kind of saying the same thing. I mean, yes, there's nuances and differences, but what's more important is that, and here's the thing, like there's two things here, right? Okay, so one, it's more important that you're comparing across deals using the same metric, right? So I just like to take the purchase price or the rent and divide it by the purchase price and get that ratio, right? And check out, if it's above, 1%, I know it's probably going to cash flow, right? It's a very quick metric. Okay. And I can kind of compare properties to each other based on that, right? Because it gives me something that I can use consistently. But I could use cap rate to do something similar, right? I could look at the cash on cash return, right? There's a lot of different metrics that I could use to figure that out, or I could just go, or I could just go and figure out the actual cash flow. Like, sometimes I just would put everything into a spreadsheet and calculate all the expenses and look at them that way, right? And at one point I wrote a tool that did that and took that from the MLS. So, but what's really important is that you're consistently comparing. That's the thing. So what's a good deal relative to each other, and what kind of deal that you can make, how you can make something a good deal. In addition to that, here's the other thing that you have to understand here is you got to take some action. So the thing is, like, you do 20% of the work that will give you 80% of the value here. So do 20% of the due diligence, right? Find the properties that are 20%, that are 80% good. you see what I'm saying? Like where it's not the best possible that you could possibly get. Okay, but it's, and it doesn't mean that you can't find those. Sometimes you find some really good deals. But my point is, don't waste so much time and so much effort trying to like squeeze every single bit of value out of it. It's not worth that, right? In the end, you'll end up fine, 20, 30 years on the road. That little bit that you overpay at the beginning wouldn't matter. But I'm not suggesting you overpay. I underpay for all my deals. I try to find everything at least 10% under market value. But I guess the difference, what I'm saying is, like, the difference between paying 10% under market value on a property and paying 15%, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, if you're getting a good deal, it's a good deal. Just do it. Okay. Let's see. What values for these metrics should be looking for to know whether something is a good or mediocre or bad deal? We talked about this already. I use that percentage rule, but ultimately, what it comes down to is you run the numbers and you see what cash flows. So here's what you do, okay? Just to give you a little bit more details on this. Take a bunch of properties, run the numbers, run all the numbers, calculate, based on the rent, based on how much money you're putting down, right? What the mortgage will be, what the management fee, the HOA fee, all that stuff, right? And calculate it and see what the cash flow is at the end, right? And look at it in terms of a ratio of the cash flow that you're getting, right? Versus how much you're putting down, how much money you're paying for it, okay? And do that with a bunch of properties, and then figure out whatever metric you're going to use, right? If you're going to use the 1% rule, or if you're going to use cap rate, or you're going to use cash on cash return, just figure out that metric after you've actually run the numbers on some properties, and then you'll know based on that metric, on the difference between those metrics and what the cash flow was ultimately on the property, what is a good number to use for that metric, right? And sometimes it might make sense. You might say, oh yeah, if it's 1%, that's good using the 1% rule, but maybe you're saying 1.2, or maybe it's like 0.9. You don't know until you've actually run the numbers on a bunch of properties. Then you say, oh, when this thing came up as, it had a cap rate of 6% or 7%, then I know that this is going to be a pretty good cash flowing deal, because I've done it backwards. I've already taken a bunch of properties and done. Does that make sense? That's going to tell you what you're looking for in the metric, because ultimately what you're looking for is the cash flow that you're getting from the property based on how much money you're investing, right? Which we could call a cash on cash return. Ultimately, you're looking for that, okay? And the way that you're so ultimately the only way to really know that is to actually calculate all of the details, from the rent that you're going to receive, the income you're going to get, minus all the expenses for the property and maintenance and whatnot, and seeing what's left over at the end. Okay. So you're going to use that. That's what you care about. But instead of having to calculate that, once you've calculated for enough properties, instead of having to calculate it for every single property, you're going to want a quick rule of thumb and a quick way to assess a property. So that's why I'm saying that you figure out one of those metrics, and then you start using that. You figure out what it is, right? You say, oh, for this market, anything that's a cap rate 6% or better, that seems to be what I'm looking for as cash flow. Or anything is 1% using the 1% rule or better is good. So that's the best way to handle this. Okay. So now that we know the overall cash flow and what different metrics we should be using to analyze whether this is a good deal or not, what is the maximum price that we should buy this property at? Okay, so this is a good question here. Again, I didn't go through the exercise. I'm being a little bit lazy, but I didn't go through and run all these numbers here, just because it's kind of hard to do on a browser when I guess I could doing spreadsheets, but essentially what we want to do, and this is what you do here, is this don't base it on the price, even on the MLS listing, right? You go back and you figure out what would make this a good deal for you, right? So you can calculate what the current deal is to see if it looks good. But a lot of times what you want to do is you want to say, okay, you work backwards. So let's say that I need to have a cap rate of 7% because I know that's a good deal, okay? Because I'm using that metric. Or let's say I need to have that, using that 1% rule, I need the rent to purchase price ratio to be 1.1 or better. Then I can figure out what that purchase price needs to be in order to have that cap rate or that cash on cash return or that 1% rule, right? Then I can calculate that, and I can figure out what the max that I'm willing to pay for it is, and then I can use that to negotiate. And I do that all the time when I purchase a property. I'm saying, okay, well, this is the price I'm trying to get, so this is what I'm going to offer, right? And this is what makes it a good deal for me. Then it's a real straightforward, easy decision, and I can put out bids on multiple properties, right? And it doesn't matter what they've listed it at. It matters what ultimately the deal ends up being. Does that make sense? So ultimately, you're going to be able to figure out what that maximum price is just by doing that math and figuring it out based on the ratio. And when you run the calculations, based on what you want to get out of it. And the only way you're going to know this stuff is by comparing it to other properties and getting familiar with the market, right? And what's available there, right? Ultimately, what do we want to do here? We want to maximize the return that we're able to get on the cash that we put into a property, right? And that's what makes it a solid investment. Yes, the property may go up in value. That's all speculation, though. We don't want to speculate. Ultimately, we're just trying to get the best return on the money that we're putting into a property as possible. And secondarily, if we're trying to we're either trying to do cash flow or leverage. I've got a dial here. There's a link to, by the way, I've got a real estate course where I talk about cash flow and leverage and all this stuff and tell you exactly how to do this. And I think I actually go through in that course actual calculations on some properties. But my point is that ultimately you're trying to get the biggest bang for your buck. But even more important than that, right, is that you just do some deals, right? Don't do bad deals, okay? Do good deals and try to find the best deal that you can, but don't get hung up on this shit. Too many people get too hung up on this and they don't do any deals. And that's just the worst. You want to just start doing deals, and some of it you're just going to have to learn by trial and error, right? Just try not to make big mistakes, right? As long as you're doing your due diligence, as long as you're doing the things that I'm telling you here, you're not going to make huge mistakes. You might make some mistakes. You might calculate, give yourself enough buffer room so that you're not in a negative cash flow situation, and just move on and just keep going. So I hope that helps. Again, I didn't go through the exact steps on this, but you should be able to run those numbers, and you got to get familiar with this, right? If you're starting off to do some real estate investment, this is what you need to do. You need to go and you need to get listings for properties that come on the market that are around the price range that you're looking for. Some single families or duplexes or maybe fourplexes, whatever it is. And you need to run the numbers over and over again, right? You can create your own tool or spreadsheets, or you can find ones out there. There's plenty of sites that have them, but you need to run the numbers over and over again until you get familiar with it, and you can develop your own metric, or you can choose one of the metrics available for determining whether something is a good deal, and you can know what price that you should be looking to offer in order to make something a good deal. You're going to get your best deals by making the deals rather than just accepting what's offered, and that means that you have to have familiarity with the market, right? And that's just going to take time. I usually say that you need to be learning the market for a good couple of months, just running the numbers on a bunch of properties, just checking the rents and checking everything and checking your math over and over again in order to get a good feel for it, right? Before you start buying. But once you have that good feel for the market, once you know, because you've run the number on hundreds of listings of properties, and you know what's a good deal, then you sort of have this intuitive sense. You can sort of say, okay, 2-bedroom, 1-bath in this area. Okay, it needs to be, this is the price that it needs to be in order for it to be a good deal. And when you can spot those good deals and you can make those good deals, okay, then you're in a much better position to negotiate, to find the deals. But again, don't sweat it too much about this stuff. Like I said, you're much better off, right? You can look at this long term, right? Minimum 10 years investment, and probably more like 20. That's how I would look at things. And in that span of time, the difference that you pay, right, between like a really, really good deal and just a good deal and a mediocre deal is not going to make much of a difference, honestly. Like what'll make the biggest impact is whether you do it or not, right? If you don't do an investment, almost all investments, like I said, become good after 20 years or 30 years. There's some exceptions, of course, but in general, that's something that you need to remember. All right. I hope this is helpful. If you haven't subscribed already, click that subscribe button below and click the bell so you don't miss any videos. I'll talk to you next time.